Hi, my name is Janeece Gonzales, and we do my presentation on civil gang injunctions. As of 2011, there are approximately 1.4 million active street, prison, and outlaw motorcycle gangs in the U.S., making up over 33,000 gangs across the United States. This represents a 40% increase from 2009, where we had a recorded estimate of 1 million gang members. Before I talk to you about just the process of civil gang injunctions, I'm just going to briefly touch base on the history of gangs and how we are become to where we're at today as far as gangs. I'll be talking about gangs only in the state of California and primarily Latino and African American based. So the migration occurred during the Mexican Revolution of 1910 to 21, which brought a lot of Mexican Americans into California from Mexico. Also during the 1940s, we saw a large increase of African Americans during this time over into California for the industrialization of that time period. Obviously, those dates that I've given you, equal rights were not something that was okay back in the day. So segregation obviously occurred when we had this large impulse of minorities coming into California like that. So they began to get segregated into only certain areas and locations within California, only in certain counties or certain areas of the county were they allowed to actually stay and live in. This created just the geographical segregation there. So ethnic groups obviously stuck together. We saw an increase in like housing projects for low-income stuff. This is where we coined the term the barrios and the ghettos, which became a slang term name for the Mexican Americans were the barrios, and the ghettos came from the African American culture for the areas that they were forced to live in. Obviously, during the same time frame, not only were minorities were not allowed to live in certain areas, but they also weren't allowed to have the same higher paying jobs as white Americans were. And so this really affected those areas and caused a lot of poverty issues in there. So this poverty kind of consumed those areas and actually forced a lot of the parents and stuff to have to go out and both parents be gone just in order to put food on the table. So that left a lot of the youth during that time to just kind of be free roaming and just to do whatever they want and hang out together, which obviously is probably not a good idea. Having this segregation, this oppression like that obviously caused a lot of hate, a lot of anger when this emerged into some violence. The street socialization process kind of developed where individuals developed identities, norms, and emotional coping strategies that legitimize the violence as a means of resolving conflict. Like-minded individuals began to form gangs, so they began to form their actual gangs at this time. And then we saw the code of streets kind of develop. So it meant basically violence with counter-violence and became the basis for identity and reputation during that time. We had a resurgence of new emerging street gangs between 1970 and 72. African-American Los Angeles youth really wanted to make a new identity for themselves during this time frame. That's where we started to see the Bloods and the Crips develop. Los Angeles gang culture actually drew so much attention to surrounding cities in California that it ended up being 19 out of 20 cities in California that were over 100,000 populations. They actually now had street gangs because of the admiration of what was going on in Los Angeles. They wanted to take after that. So in the late 1980s, the children of the initial flourish of minorities to California, now they're up into, getting into young adulthood, and they're starting to form their own gangs at this time too, and they're just taking after that classic gang minority traditions that they grew up in. So street gang defined. So the definition of street gangs are different for state to state. Obviously, I'm going to be talking about California, like I said. So for California, the definition of a street gang is any person who actively participates in any criminal street gang with knowledge that its members engage in or have engaged in a pattern of criminal activity, and who willfully promotes, furthers, or assists any felonious criminal conduct by members of that gang. And under this code is actually pretty neat because you can actually be convicted of this even if you're not an actual gang member, and even if you're not the individual who was directly most responsible for the initial felony. So the hierarchy of gangs, again, it's kind of different from state to state, gang to gang. It all kind of just varies. I'm going to give you a real general version of the hierarchy. So you usually have what's called your head gang member. Those are the guys that are usually already in prison because they've earned their spot up at the high top on the ranking there with whatever crimes they've committed. And so what they do is they will delegate out plans to the generals. The generals then will delegate to lower authorities called the street lieutenants, who are the direct supervisors of the foot soldiers. And the foot soldiers are the everyday guys that you see on the street, the drug dealers, the murder for hire guys that are out there doing the dirty work basically for the gang. Financial funding. Gangs are obviously financially funded, not from 9-to-5 banker hour jobs. It's usually from the sale of illicit drugs or property or anything illegal. This type of sales is kind of pyramidal. You've got the large-scale drug traffickers and smugglers at the top, who then distribute out to the street gangs, and then they filter that out into the cities, in the urban cities. Deaths obviously are a major issue with gangs. Actually, in Los Angeles County, during 2001, there was over 1,000 homicides reported within just that 1 year. Over half of those homicides were directly gang-related and documented, which is insane. The effects on the community. So social disorganization has been defined as the inability of local communities to realize the common value of their residents or solve commonly experienced problems. So social disorganization in neighborhoods occurs when criminal street gangs claim certain residential urban neighborhoods as their turf. This means anyone not belonging to this turf, such as rival gang members or non-gang members in that community, are then subject to victimization should they cross over into the wrong area. Neighborhood residents are at a greater risk nowadays than they were back in the day for being killed because of the drive-by shootings. We have media coverage that's really putting a strain on community, causing a lot of fear because they're always having to cover the high-profile murders and the deaths and everything, and that's just being streamed into homes and just creating that fear and manifesting it. A lot of times people don't talk about the financial impact gangs have on communities and put stress on them. The study was conducted in Los Angeles County that 272 gang-related gunshot victims totaled nearly $5 million worth of damages or debt in emergency room and surgical visits, intensive care units, and things like that to treat the patient, which equaled out to about $5,500 per patient per day. So that leads us into gang injunctions. So legal interventions directed at reducing gang activity, focusing on imposing harsher punishments for gang members and gang-related crime, are created, and those are the civil gang injunctions. Within the past 20 years in California, legislation such as the Street Terrorism Act, the Street Education Prevention Act specifically, it's called the STEP Act, has expanded the legal definition of gang membership, and it's cool because it actually created new crimes for which gang members can be prosecuted and enhance the sentences that can be applied to gang members. So it's kind of a beneficial thing that they created there. Civil gang injunctions have become a phenomenal tool in helping law enforcement agencies control the flourishing gang epidemic in larger cities like Los Angeles. Almost a decade ago, the Supreme Court endorsed the use of public nuisance injunctions as a means of control the street gangs. So public nuisance injunctions prohibit the nuisance conduct within a prescribed geographical area, focusing on the turf claimed by the gang. So within the city of Los Angeles today, there are 43 permanent gang injunctions in place, restricting the activities of 71 gangs. Through the legal process that involves suing alleged gang members and/or gangs as a whole in civil court, prosecuting attorneys throughout California have obtained civil gang injunctions that prohibit alleged gang members from doing things such as walking down the street, loitering in front of gas stations or convenience stores, riding in cars together, and just harassing the general public in that community. An injunction is similar to a civil restraining order in that it's issued by a civil court and contains a list of prohibited activities. Like a restraining order, violating an injunction can result in criminal prosecution for a misdemeanor violation of contempt of court, which is punishable by up to 6 months and a $1,000 fine. So the legal process for criminal civil injunctions is the legal process for attaining a gang injunction involves a prosecuting agency, again, suing the gang or its gang members in civil court. This lawsuit is filed in civil court on the grounds that the gang creates a public nuisance to the community and therefore must be enjoined from certain activities so as to protect the community from the nuisance it creates. So the evidence that's created to prosecute these things is created from the civilians, the community members, and also from the cops that have to go out there and actually combat these gangs on a day-to-day basis. Instead of opposed to restraining orders, these gang injunctions are actually permanent all the time, though. There's no expiration dates. So the gang injunctions subject those who are gang members to, in violation, or to greater police supervision and control. So the main goal of the prosecutors in enforcing these civil gang injunctions to strive to accomplish is to prevent the members of the criminal gangs from engaging in certain activities that directly cause fear and nuisance to non-gang members within the community. So generally, individually named members of a gang and the gang itself as an unincorporated association are added to the gang injunction by a police officer. And what happens is the officer will go out and they'll serve these actual members of the gang and serve them with copies of their notice. And so it's neat because they're served civilly. So they have, those who are initially served the notice have the ability to fight the restraining or the civil injunctions, but they aren't entitled to a public defender because it's a civil court thing. So a lot of times the prosecution of these, they won't be contested because these gang members don't have enough money to fight something like that, and they're not entitled to a public defender. So it makes it a lot easier and puts it in place. And for those who are not initially named in a lawsuit during the initial serving of the paperwork, they can actually still be added to the injunction at a later time by any officer who deems that they're actually involved in that same gang. So they can be served, and those who are served after the initial injunction has been put out, they actually have no opportunity to contest it. It's only those who are initially on that first order of injunction. So the first time that a defendant can actually even contest this injunction when they're served with it is when they actually violate it. So when they're found in violation of it, they're found in contempt of court. So their first chance comes when they come in front of the judge to say why they violated the civil injunction order. And a lot of times that the gang members won't stick around to contest it because they'd rather take the plea and get out of jail immediately than take their chances in trying to hire a lawyer, a public defender to defeat the charges. So it's really beneficial. The success rates, to date, there hasn't been a whole lot of studies that have been conducted. There has been one that did show of the 14 injunctions obtained in Los Angeles County between 1993 and 98, it showed a 5 to 10% decrease in violent crimes for that area. They also gauged responses of citizens, and the citizens claimed that there was a higher police presence, their fear went down, and there was a really positive outcome for that, just gauging on that one determination of how successful that injunction was. So some of the improvements that they've suggested, obviously once the gang members are clean, they want to see that their records, they're off of those injunction things. So just having their name removed from that injunction so they're not held accountable to that forever, because those are permanent. And then just the vagueness of the injunction, which is kind of a common thing. They just want to be more specific. So there are things in the future that might come up as far as the issues with injunctions, but right now they're not an issue at all. So in conclusion, I feel like they are effective. Civil injunctions are effective. There's obviously been proof so far. There needs to be more to really substantiate this research that I did, but so far it looks so good. I wouldn't have any complaints. So that's my presentation, and I hope you liked it.